We discussed the independent speaking task paired choice, the second of the independent tasks. We analyzed how to prepare for the task, including looking at a brainstorming activity to help understand the requirements of the task. Now, the scoring system for the integrated task, actually for all of the tasks on the test, are pretty much the same. Again, everything is evaluated holistically, looking at your overall appraisal instead of just focusing individually on errors. Each criterion is measured from 0 to 4, 4 being the highest and 0 the lowest. And when you receive your overall TOEFL speaking score, you will receive a scaled score and your proficiency level. So, in the first two videos, we looked at the independent speaking tasks, the free choice and then the paired choice. Today we're transitioning to the integrated speaking section. Now, once again, notice that there are two tasks in each different integrated speaking category. So in our video today, we're going to be looking at the read, listen, and speak integrated task, and then in our final video, we're going to be looking at the listen and speak task. So, in this general overview of the integrated speaking section, let's take a look at the different types of topics we may see and how the task itself is organized. First off, there are two basic types of integrated read, listen, and speak task, either an academic lecture or discussion, or a campus life task. And you will see one of both on the test. So you will have to read a brief academic or campus-related passage in 45 seconds, listen and take notes to a lecture or a campus conversation, and then give an oral response, integrating both the information from the passage and the lecture. And now keep in mind you're not given a lot of time to do this. You're given only 30 seconds to plan and 60 seconds to give an oral response. Now we need to note that in the TOEFL Quick Prep download that I'm using for this video series, it does not include an academic read, listen, speak integrated task. So actually in this video we'll be examining a campus life example. Also, I want to kind of emphasize here that with the download there is a transcript that I do not want us to look at right now. And so really right now, please don't look at the transcript because we'll be analyzing it just a little bit later in this presentation. So let's jump in and actually look at the example. So here are the directions. The university is making a change in the courses it will offer. Read the article from the university newspaper about the change. Give yourself 45 seconds to read the article. So I'm going to bring the article up on the screen and give you 45 seconds to do so. Now, listen to two students discussing the article. Everything all right?
Yeah, I'm just upset about that article I showed you this morning.
Why? What's the big deal?
Well, as an art major, I think it's a big loss for the department. The university's got it all wrong.
What do you mean?
Well, the low enrollment isn't because art majors don't want to take these classes. Problem is, who has time to take them when there are so many other requirements?
I don't understand.
See, the classes they're eliminating are all optional. The required courses are mostly painting and drawing, and they take up all our time. What we really need are different requirements. Then art majors could take a better variety of classes, all the things that we're interested in.
That makes sense, but the thing about the professor...
Well, that's true, but still, they're being drastic. If money's the problem, they could hire a part-time professor. Or most of the professors in the department have secondary fields.
Really?
Yeah, at least a few painting teachers are also great sculptors. I'm sure one of them could teach a class.
The woman expresses her opinion of the university's plan. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. And you have 60 seconds to give your response. Okay, now let's go in and analyze a little bit more carefully the three different parts of the task. First, let's look at the reading passage. First off, what do we notice? Well, the reading passage typically involves some sort of real-life campus situation, a typical problem students could face. And generally it's written in the style of a document that you would see around campus, a newspaper article perhaps, a classroom notice, or even a note written by a professor. And the reading itself usually contains 4 to 5 sentences. So as we go back and look at the reading passage, you will notice that, it has exactly 5 sentences, and looks like something you would see from something around campus. Now, do you remember what kind of reading this information would be found in? It was mentioned right at the top of the activity. If you said a newspaper, a campus newspaper article, you're correct. Now, generally when I tell students to focus on the reading at the first part, I suggest to students kind of try to think about the fact that in the reading there are most likely going to be 3 main ideas that the passage is going to give. Now, there could be more, but most of the time it'll be around 3. So as we look again at the reading, let's see if we can identify them. Well, again, sometimes it's easy to kind of look at sentences and try to combine information. So first off, as we look through the reading, we notice that the first 2 sentences really talk about the fact that sculpture class will be eliminated due to a lack of student interest. The next couple of sentences talk about the fact that the department's only sculpture professor is retiring. And finally, because of the limited budget, it prevents hiring a new full-time professor. Now, of course, you could say that there are other pieces of information we can include. We could include the fact that the number of art students have increased, but fewer and fewer art majors are taking sculpture classes. That certainly could be part of the idea as well. So again, there might be 4 ideas if you think. But generally, look for around 3 to 4. Now, unfortunately, the reading will disappear during the listening portion of the task, and it will not return during the speaking portion. However, you probably won't have enough time anyway to take notes on the reading due to the short amount of time you have. So instead, you're probably just going to have to rely on your memory when it comes to the information in the reading section. Okay, now in analyzing the listening passage, we notice that it was a conversation between 2 people, usually classmates. And they're discussing how the situation in the reading affects them. And generally they discuss some kind of resolution to the situation. Now again, remember that you can take notes during this portion of the test, just like you could with the TOEFL listening section. But the key to keep in mind here is that you need to follow the order of the conversation, especially focusing on who's saying what. That played a very important part in the actual speaking activity. If you remember, the speaking task only involved the point of view of one of the students, not both of them. Now, of course, this brings us back to a question we asked during the TOEFL listening section. Is this actually a real conversation? Well, again, as we mentioned in the previous video series of the listening portion, the conversation itself is more like the essence of a conversation, not really an actual conversation. So the key to keep in mind here is that even though the topics may be similar to something you might discuss on a college campus, I mean, for example, eliminating some classes, that's certainly a very common thing that occurs on a university campus. The conversations themselves are purposely constructed to achieve a specific result. So if you'll notice, the conversations usually follow this fairly predictable organization. Speaker A, which may or may not be the first person who speaks, discusses the situation in the reading, often expressing some kind of problem. Speaker B asks questions to help further explain the situation. And generally that's their only purpose, is to sit there, is to basically ask questions. And that helps, of course, Speaker A elaborate on the situation. And finally, Speaker B usually helps Speaker A come to some kind of solution. Now, as we go through and analyze the transcript, first let's listen again and follow along, then we'll go back and discuss.
Everything all right?
Yeah, I'm just upset about that article I showed you this morning.
Why? What's the big deal?
Well, as an art major, I think it's a big loss for the department. The university's got it all wrong.
What do you mean?
Well, the low enrollment isn't because art majors don't want to take these classes. Problem is, who has time to take them when there are so many other requirements?
I don't understand.
See, the classes they're eliminating are all optional. The required courses are mostly painting and drawing, and they take up all our time. What we really need are different requirements. Then art majors could take a better variety of classes, all the things that we're interested in.
That makes sense, but the thing about the professor...
Well, that's true, but still, they're being drastic. If money's the problem, they could hire a part-time professor. Or most of the professors in the department have secondary fields.
Really?
Yeah, at least a few painting teachers are also great sculptors. I'm sure one of them could teach a class.
So, the final part of the integrated task involves the speaking task. So again, the prompt itself involves summarizing the point of view of one or sometimes both of the participants, though usually it's the one with the problem in the conversation. The other thing to keep in mind is that it usually does not require a complete summary of the reading. The reading is more for background information, not necessarily to be included in the speaking response. And the speaking criteria are basically the same that you saw in the independent speaking task. Now let's go back for a moment and take a look at this, because as we can see, a lot of the descriptions, the descriptors are basically the same. Once again, a 4 is considered the highest score on this part of the test. And as you notice in the general description, they talk about the importance of fulfilling the demands of the task. That it's highly intelligible, so that we can understand it. It's coherent, so it uses a lot of good signal words. And as we notice in the other areas of delivery, language use, and topic development, a lot of the same ideas that we see before, involving the pace, making sure that we use at least a very natural rhythm when we speak, that we have good grammatical structures, and of course using strong vocabulary words, and that we involve a clear progression of ideas. Now this one, of course, is very important. As we mentioned before, during your actual speaking response, it's probably best to follow the order of the conversation itself. That will really help in providing a better organization to your response. So once again, a good response is coherent, it's logical and relevant. It contains good grammatical structure, so there are no major errors that prevent us from understanding. Contains good vocabulary. That's always a given, I think, on the TOEFL. It's well structured, using those signal words to help organize. Of course, we don't want to use a lot of filler ideas. If you recall from the previous videos, fillers are, those pauses or or again, we want to fill the time as much as possible with interesting and relevant information. And then finally, as we always should pay attention to, is being intelligible, making sure that we have only a few pronunciation or speaking mistakes, but overall our response is still understandable. So again, in analyzing the speaking response, we notice once again that the task is focusing mostly on the woman. And that's because it's the woman who basically is the one explaining her opinion in the response, or in the listening passage. So in this case, the idea here is that we should really try to focus on what she says in the conversation. As we noticed, the man's particular purpose was basically there just to ask her questions. This is something we noticed in the TOEFL listening section in our previous video series. Now this brings up a very interesting idea about, well, what exactly are they looking for in the speaking response? And that is, I believe, the two concepts of paraphrasing and summarizing. Really, the idea here is that you have to take information that someone else is saying and for the most part, try to put it in your words, or at least use words that are effective, and also to summarize information. So that involves the ideas of paraphrasing. Now, paraphrasing means when you use different words to restate and or simplify something that someone else said. And summarize, which basically means trying to reduce the number of words in order to give only the most essential information. Now, if you notice, the listening passage itself was not very long, and you actually have 60 seconds to deliver a response. The TOEFL doesn't necessarily state that you have to fill all 60 seconds. So in this case, you probably will say almost everything that the woman said in the conversation, and not really worry too much about time. But let's take a look and see how these two ideas of paraphrasing and summarizing work. So first off, as we look at the woman's part, we're going to focus mostly on what she says. Obviously, the man's point, or his purpose really, is just to get her to talk more about the problem. So in this case, we're going to focus on only what her lines are. So as we go through and paraphrase and summarize, you'll notice that we will use only her part of the conversation. So what I've done is I've isolated just her part of the reading, of the listening, and I've put it here on the left side. Now let's discuss a little bit of how we're going to paraphrase and summarize this information. Now first off, you'll notice that in the conversation, they tried to make it sound like a real conversation using a lot of these kinds of filler words, because obviously they're connective in a sense when we speak. Yeah, or well. Notice when she introduces a topic here, problem is, obviously this is not something we would do when writing, but it's very common when we're speaking. So in this case, she's kind of using a lot of these more informal spoken conventions, and we have to find a way to paraphrase and summarize them without necessarily using these exact same ideas. And we also have to kind of figure out, well, what is the most important information that she's talking about? Well, first off, we notice that she is upset. And she's upset because she thinks the university's got this all wrong. And she goes on to describe that the low enrollment isn't because the art majors don't want to take the class, but that really there are perhaps too many other requirements. So the key here is to think about, these are the three or so main ideas in the first part of her discussion. So the idea is, how can we paraphrase and summarize it on the right side? Well, here's an attempt. Now remember, a summary is a way to kind of reduce the number of words. So actually I've reduced the number of words perhaps only slightly. We don't necessarily have to summarize to the point of leaving out important information. We must include all of the important information that she says. So again, in this case, let's take a look at how I've paraphrased a little bit and summarized the information. The woman is angry because she believes the university is mistaken in its action. She thinks the problem of low enrollment is due to art majors like herself not having enough time to take these classes because there are too many other requirements. So again, notice what I did is reduce the number of words while still incorporating all of the main details that she talks about. And again, I think you'll have plenty of time to speak about that. Okay, let's look at the next part. So the next part, she says, again, using some of these more common spoken conventions like see. So in this case, we want to try to think about, well, we want to use only the essential pieces of information. Well, so let's go through it again and try to determine what are the most important things she's saying. Well, first off, the classes they're eliminating are optional, and that the required courses take up most of their time. What they really need are different requirements. Then they could take a variety of classes that they're interested in. So now let's see how I paraphrased and summarized them on the right side. She also mentions that most of the courses they are eliminating are optional, while the required courses take up too much time in their schedules. She says that what they really need are different requirements that art majors would be interested in. So again, I've paraphrased by changing some of the words a little bit, but for the most part I keep a lot of her language. In terms of summarizing, I basically just try to eliminate pieces of information that maybe I don't think are necessary. Again, you certainly could mention the ideas of painting and drawing, but the key is to think about that there are required courses that take up too much time. So really, I think it depends on if you want to include every detail. I think that would certainly be fine. But in this case, I've tried to just focus on the most essential information. Finally, she talks about here, in responding to the money situation, again, she's using kind of confirmation or affirmation cues where she acknowledges, an acknowledgement cue rather, as to what the man is saying. Well, that's true. But then she disagrees necessarily with the level of the response. It's too drastic. If money's the problem, they could hire part-time professors. Or the professors in the department have other degrees as well. And those particular painting teachers can teach sculpting. They're great sculptors. And she's pretty sure one of them could teach a class. Now, of course, we're talking about students here, so maybe there are some other issues that the school hasn't discussed, but we're really most interested in what her opinion is. So again, to paraphrase and summarize, notice how I put most of that information into one general paragraph. Finally, instead of hiring full-time staff to replace the retired professor, they could use part-time staff, or even ask some of the art staff who are qualified to teach the sculpture classes to save money. So again, notice how the use of those signal words to help connect information help to provide an organization or structure. But again, I followed the organization of what she said. I followed her order. And I tried to retain the most essential information by sometimes substituting other words and reducing or eliminating words that I felt were not necessary. Now, I realize that seems easy in this case, but of course it's not. You definitely have to be good at taking notes and try to write down as much as you can. So, paraphrasing, again, is when we try to use synonyms or synonymous ideas to replace the words we use in the text. But I think it's important to recognize we don't have to paraphrase everything. That is not the goal here of this task. Again, I do believe that you could say almost everything the woman is saying in the conversation and not necessarily, reduce that much. Really, paraphrasing is just reducing things that are a bit unnecessary or to help simplify a little bit to save time. But we want to maintain the essence of what's being said. So notice once again, I'm going to pull out a couple of examples where I paraphrase a little bit in order to kind of cut back a little on time. So first off, if you'll notice over here, she talks about the fact that that the university has got it all wrong, and that's a big loss for the university. And in this case, so notice how we take a lot of this information and basically paraphrase it a little bit better by saying that she believes the university is mistaken in its action. So in this case, we kind of use different words. Instead of saying they've got it all wrong, I saved a little time by saying they're mistaken. So I tried to use a little bit better word, perhaps a little simpler or even a little bit stronger in this case to basically save a little time and to cover the basic idea of what she's saying in many words. I do other examples of using other words too, using synonyms. Instead of upset, I use angry. Of course, that's not necessary. I could easily say the woman is upset. So again, I don't think it's necessary to paraphrase everything, but I tried to paraphrase at least in a few places to save time. Okay, notice in this example, when I tried to paraphrase, she spends a lot of time talking about the other professors in the department who are great sculptors and perhaps could teach these courses. Notice in the example on the right, I basically just mentioned the other art staff who are qualified to teach the sculpture classes. Now again, could I mention the fact that there are a few other art staff or painting teachers who are qualified to teach these courses? Again, you probably have enough time to do that. But what I'm trying to demonstrate in this particular point is that I'm trying to save a little time. And in this case, I think that we can include most of the information she's saying by just mentioning that they're qualified to teach the courses. Now, again, summarizing, I think the key to keep in mind is we have only 60 seconds, which actually, in this part of the test, may be enough time or maybe even too much time. It really depends on you, I think. But in my opinion, I think 60 seconds is probably perfectly fine. The conversation itself is not that long. And really 60 seconds to summarize her particular point of view, I think is probably going to be enough to include most of the details, or almost all of them. But the idea here is that we have to express the essential ideas. So, here's some things to keep in mind when you're trying to summarize for this speaking task. Again, remember when you take notes during the listening passage, try to follow the same order as the speaker. And this will help you when you're giving your response. Remember to use good signal words to help organize, especially sequence signals and those addition signals that I used. So for example, first, next, and finally, or words such as also or in addition. These will help provide at least a kind of a basic organization or structure to your response. Remember to paraphrase if necessary, making sure to eliminate, reduce, or simplify any ideas that will help save time. However, and this is especially true that we're going to see in the next task, the academic task, if the speaker does use technical vocabulary, in other words, vocabulary that you would see in a particular class, we probably should try to use it in the response. In this case, what the TOEFL is trying to see is if you can grasp the understanding of what technical words are. So my advice is, and you'll see this more in the second video, definitely try to make sure we incorporate any technical issues that the speaker brings up. And I think another thing we have to recognize is that this is also an exercise in using reported speech instead of direct speech. And related to that, I think it's perfectly fine to use the present tense when you're relaying the person's response. Now, for a moment, let's go back and say, well, what is reported speech? Well, basically what she said would be considered her actual words. And in this case, it would not be important for us to use her actual words or direct speech in order to give a response. So instead, we want to report what she says. We want to use her words, but we want to put it through the filter of saying, she says this. So again, notice in this case where she says, I think, we don't want to use those words in our response, because if we say, I think, then it sounds like that we're giving our opinion. The important thing here is we have to state what she believes. So notice again in this part of the response, I used the phrase, she believes the university is mistaken in its action. So again, notice I kept the verb form in the present tense. You don't have to use the past tense, I think, in this case. Many times we think of reported speech as using the past tense. But I think for the TOEFL speaking task, you're perfectly fine to use the present tense. Here's another example. Again, notice she is expressing her particular point of view. In fact, she even rhetorically states who has the time to do this. Well, so once again, we want to say, well, what is her opinion? These are her words that she's using, but we don't want to use those words exactly. We want to state it in a reported way. So in this case, we summarize this information by starting off with she thinks. She thinks this is what they should do. So once again, these are a couple of examples of reported speech. So I do believe that this is something that the TOEFL speaking task is trying to evaluate. Can you use reported speech? And can you summarize information accurately? Can you get all of the details of what she's saying? Now, one of the challenges, I think, as we move forward in these last couple of videos for this series, is the fact that these particular tasks are very specific in nature. It's very difficult to recommend a lot of other resources because basically the integrated speaking tasks do require information that the TOEFL has put together specifically for the test. Those conversations, for example, those reading passages, those are things that we cannot find, I think, easily on the internet. So really, in my opinion, and this is definitely my opinion for the entire TOEFL test, but specifically looking at this part of the test, you really do need to think about purchasing authentic materials produced by ETS. And I would especially recommend the official guide to the TOEFL test. This is something I mention in every video at the end when it comes to resources. Of course, there are other resources too, but the reason I really like the official guide for these parts of the test is because they do actually contain real responses from test takers. So that way you can listen to the responses and judge for yourself to say, well, what is it that I think they're looking for on the test? And again, since that information is specifically copyrighted, we can't use it here in the video. The only information I'm referring to is the publicly produced material that ETS provides. So in this case, I would really highly recommend that if you haven't done so already, you really do need to get the official information produced by ETS. I think that's the only way you're going to be able to prepare for this part of the test. And in terms of delivering the response, again, keep in mind that I am recommending that you purchase the actual textbook. But I still think it's very effective for you to record yourself. And this is something we mentioned in our previous videos, that recording yourself gives you the experience of what it's like to take this part of the test. But remember, we do need a systematic approach. We don't just want to sit down and record ourselves several times in a row. We want to go back and listen to ourselves. So again, let's follow these steps as we're recording ourselves for this part of the test. Now, at first, remember, the important thing is we want to get the answer or information correct. So the first time, don't pay attention too much to how long it takes you. Just relax and try to do your best. The second step is go back and listen to that recording and think about the following things. Now, obviously, number one is, did you accurately relay the most essential information? Many times students leave out information. And as we mentioned in the listening section, in the listening video series, one of the important things you have to be able to do is to capture almost every important idea in detail. Obviously, when you go back and listen, think about, did I make any of those common speaking errors we discussed before? Also, as you look at your response, again, you don't have to pay attention to it too much the first time, but try to just see how long did it take you to respond. The TOEFL really doesn't specify that a response given in 60 seconds is necessarily better than in 50 or even 45. So I think that's one of the challenges of this part of the test is, even if I used all 60 seconds, I think the most important thing is that I include all the important details and information, that I get it correct. So I think in this case, this is one area where I don't know if I can give much advice other than saying that we have to make sure we follow all of those things. So again, if your response is 45 seconds, but it's good, you probably could get a good score too. Now, if it's 25 or 30 seconds, that might be a problem. Now, step 3, record yourself again. This time, try to concentrate on eliminating the ideas that weren't successful and adding any more detail and information if necessary. And in this case, the second time, try to pay a little more attention to time. If you were under 60 seconds by more than 15 or 20 seconds, so for example, if you gave a response that was closer to 40 seconds, then maybe you didn't include enough information. Now, if you were over 60 seconds, perhaps you were just nervous and had too many pauses, had too many speaking errors, or maybe you included almost every last detail when maybe not every detail is important. So if you were over 60 seconds, just relax and concentrate. Focus on just the important ideas. More than likely, you included too much information, and then maybe you needed to just focus on only the most interesting and relevant information. And again, this is a process you might want to repeat a couple more times. And you'll become more comfortable with this particular skill, and you'll probably be able to use fewer of those ahs and ums and pauses. But that's really our goal, is we want to continue to improve and fill our time with important information. And most likely your time will continue to improve as you practice. And really, I wish I could be more help in this particular part. But again, a 45-second response may be perfectly fine. The TOEFL really doesn't specify. My feeling is, if you're giving a response that's only about 25 or 30 seconds, it's probably too short. So some final thoughts. On the integrated speaking task, read, listen, and speak, during the reading portion, you'll have 45 seconds to read the passage. Again, it'll either be a campus life-related reading or an academic passage. Now remember, don't take notes during the reading because really you don't have enough time. 45 seconds is a very brief amount of time to read the information you're given. But during that time, try to at least identify 3 to 4 main ideas that you're probably going to need to reference when you're actually giving the speaking portion of the test. During the listening portion, do try to take notes, and especially follow the order of the conversation or the lecture, and write down as many details as you can. And notice if it's the academic passage, notice who has the the campus life, notice who has the problem in the conversation. Sometimes both may share the same problem, but it's usually just one person with the problem or situation. Again, that's not always true. And then finally, when you prepare to speak, remember you've got 30 seconds, and the prompt will most likely involve the person who has the problem and his or her opinion. Now, of course, this is a little bit different for the academic passage. And remember, the reading does not return. Also, during the speaking portion, you've got 60 seconds to actually speak, and try to follow the order of the conversation as best as you can. Use signal words to connect information. paraphrase and summarize where it's possible, and especially thinking about using reported speech. Try to include as much accurate detail as you can, and remember, avoid those common speaking errors. Now remember, in this video we did not talk about the academic read, listen, and speak integrated tasks. So instead, what I would recommend is check out our TOEFL reading skills series and our listening series on our YouTube channel, especially the ones focusing on academic lectures. But we will look at an academic related topic in the next video, the final video of the series, when we look at the listen and speak task. And you'll see there are some overlapping ideas, but I would really recommend, if you haven't already, to look back at the TOEFL listening series. Once again, the recommended materials, as mentioned earlier in this video, anything produced by ETS is probably going to be helpful because, again, they will include authentic materials that you'll see on the test. So, again, there are two websites that you can go to. Once again, that official guide to the TOEFL test I would highly recommend. And we do have a TOEFL TOEIC preparation website, the link of which you can find at the bottom of this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for the final video, Part 4, Integrated Speaking, Listen and Speak.